Welcome to More Than a Broker, the podcast that goes beyond the traditional definition of a logistics provider. My name is Andrew Elsener, co-founder of Spot. In each episode, we will dive into the stories of industry experts, keep you up to date on the highs and lows of the logistics marketplace, and introduce you to the people behind the advanced technologies that are driving innovation for brokers, shippers, and carriers within our industry. Join us as we explore the world of logistics through a different lens. This is More Than a Broker.
Drivers, start your engine!
Well, Jonathan, thanks for, I just kind of jump in if that's okay.
No, that's perfect.
And we kind of started this, the goal was to try and bring like different aspects of logistics. So from sales to market insights. And we really enjoyed when you spoke, got good feedback. And so there's a ton of questions about the market right now and, and what people see. And so I thought you'd be a good person to talk to.
You're right. And I hope to hear a little bit of insight from you as well.
Well, I don't know.
There's a lot that's happened in this market in a short period of time.
So just to start, so FTR, how did it start and what's it today? Has it changed its mission and what it focuses on from the beginning?
We haven't changed our mission, but we've changed a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in the beginning, we're basically an offshoot of work done at Cummins Engines back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh,
wow. And so the founder of the company, Ed Graham, was a Cummins employee. He did all their market forecasting. So he was highly geared into trucking and the engine market.
Yeah.
And so our start and one of our primary focuses is still understanding what's happening within the equipment market. So we can give the manufacturers and suppliers better information on what to prepare for, how that market is cycling.
So how many trucks people are ordering and
Exactly.
that makes sense.
What is the build schedule looking like over the next, 12, 24, 36 months?
Okay.
So they can better gear up for that cycle because it always cycles pretty big. But over the last, 20 years, we've focused much more on trying to take the data and insights we have on the freight markets so we can understand equipment and apply that to the carrier and shipper base as well.
Okay.
And understanding then what that means for modes with intermodal and cargo load, et cetera. So we've expanded our product base, but it's still highly focused on understanding what's happening with the macro. What does that mean for demand? Right. And then how does that then get distributed out to different areas of the market and how do they get affected? Because it's different if you're a carrier or a shipper or an equipment person.
So then on the demand side, you look at supply also?
We do not focus on sort of what the supplier environment is. Our goal is to give those suppliers that are in the market the best understand we can on what does demand look like.
Okay.
There are certainly times in the industry when you're looking at equipment production where you get supply constrained, right? And similarly on, if you're talking about sort of the carrier environment, there's periods of time where we get supply constrained. And we try to be able to measure when those are happening. But if you just try to just precisely measure what the capacity in the market is, whether it's production or trucks, you tend to fail because there's so much that happens in the market that you just can't measure effectively in real time.
Right. So you started, was it early 2000, right? 2001?
Yeah, late 2001. First thing I ever did for FTR. I had an older brother that said, "Hey, you've got a CD burner." So I had a dual CD burner, and he's like, "We need to put together some marketing material." So that was the first thing I ever did, was just burning CDs for some marketing material. And then shortly after that, started doing some part-time independent work for them, and just slowly grew over time.
Yeah.
And now we're hitting 25 years of activity of doing stuff with the company. Done a little bit of everything. Over that span. We were always a very small organization early on. There's basically like 5 or 6 of us that were running the whole operation. So we were all involved in doing the work that we were doing. And we've continued to grow over that time. A lot of it just organically as we add in, different products for different markets, because we were already doing a lot of that work anyways. We were already measuring the economy. We're already measuring freight, right? Now it's like, all right, we've been measuring it. How can we take this information and put it out in a way that helps a railroad understand what's going on in the marketplace, or the broker, or sort of the other aspects of the carrier market understand what's going on in the marketplace.
So how do customers typically get your guys' insight into the market?
We've got basically 3 key elements we do, right? Each month we put together several reports for all the different markets. All right. So we'll take all of our information, put it into a standard report. So, on page 3, there's going to be this information. You can go to page 3, find exactly what you're looking for. All right. We also then publish data sets of all the underlying data going into that report. Right. And then each month we do a webinar. And so focusing on different aspects of what's going on in the marketplace. So you can either read the information, you can get the data of the information, or you can listen to us talk about the information. All right. Because a good chunk of what we do is really about communication and trying to help people understand and know what the driving mechanisms are and what could be changing and what those risks are. Because data is good. It's a critical element, right? But whenever you're talking about a forecast, the data is going to be wrong. And
Right.
So understanding about what is wrong about that data and how to understand what it could mean is a key aspect of what we do.
Yeah, I think there's so much data out there, but what almost what the hell does it really mean, and how do you use it or apply it, especially now?
And there's a lot more data that we can use, right? But sometimes they don't really tell us something important.
Right.
So part of what we're always doing is trying to look at data and say, what is giving us an important signal? All right. Whether it's talking about the macro stuff or just talking about what's going on within each of the markets, there's lots of data and we're reviewing it constantly, but only some of them are actually giving us a signal about what's going on and what's coming next.
So when we talk about signals, and I get this question a lot, what should people look at? Because there's so many different pundits that like tender rejection but I feel like a lot of that's latent. It's a lagging thing in the market. Something already happened. But the question I get constantly is what should we look at? What's going to tell us if something's going to either go up or down?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things you guys look at?
The problem with that question is that there is no single, set of data that you can just look at and say, all right, here's the set of data I need to look at to understand what's going on in the market and what to prepare for, because it's a vast market. There's different areas that are doing good or bad at any given point in time. So if you just look at, the ATA tonnage, or you just look at the cash freight index, it's giving you a signal, right? But it's not giving you a complete view of everything that's going on across the broad spectrum, especially when we're talking about the trucking market. Because trucking is lots and lots. It's an aggregation of many, many smaller markets, right? And so if you just look at a couple of data sets, you're getting a couple of signals, but you need many signals. One of the key things we do, so we have a transportation model. It's called FreightCast. It takes the big macro data, right? The stuff that drives the fundamentals in the economy, and translates that into demand in the marketplace. So how much tonnage or how many loads are getting created. All right. How much stuff is getting put into the system? That's the stuff that's got to move, right? That uses lots and lots of data inputs, right? So it doesn't matter which one are the critical inputs at any given time. It's using lots of them all the time, right? So that's one of the ways that we use that to get better understand. Instead of trying to pick out, all right, I need this one to tell me the signal. Now I need this one. We bring all of them in. They're all giving you signals at the same time. Some of them are more important than others. And that drives then what we view as where we are in conditions right now and what does that look like going forward. Because for us, the primary item we always have to reflect to, no matter what the other elements are, is just demand in the system. Because if we don't have a proper reflection of how many loads are getting created in the U.S. economy, then all of our other metrics are going to be wrong. So that's the critically important piece for us. Then once we know that, then we can try to do the work to understand where do we sit with capacity? How many active trucks are out there, right? What's the driver situation? We can layer that then onto it. But if we try to do that capacity work without knowing the demand work, we only know half the picture.
Right. So do you guys go back in cycles and look at factors that potentially were the reason? So like if you went from 13 when the vortex hit to the 16, 17, 18 to 19, and then obviously we know COVID, but do you guys go back and look at the
We
factors?
do. So the point of emphasis that we try to get to when we're trying to understand the market cycles is what we call active truck utilization.
Okay.
In active truck utilization, it's just taking that, all right, we know what the demand for loads is, all right? We know what the relative amount of capacity that's out there, all right? What's the thing we don't know? We don't know how productive every single driver is, all right? But we've got a model then that helps us understand, here's how productive a driver is. Here's how much demand is out there. This is how many drivers you need in the market. Once we compare that to the amount of demand that's actually in the market, now we can understand how tight the market is. So right now we're approaching, 98, 99% utilization of the overall truck fleet, right? So we're getting tight. There's only a percent or two of excess capacity right now. So that means the market's tight, right? That's why we're in the environment we're in right now. What's driving that tightness, though? Is it because we're getting really strong gains in volume? Is it because we're losing productivity because we're not moving things efficiently? Is it because we're losing capacity, right? Those are the three levers that are happening at any given point in time. And so understanding what's driving it helps us understand how those pressures are going to get affected in the marketplace.
So here's the question that I get constantly is a lot of shippers have come back and said, all right, they used to do the annual bid. Then the adjustment post-COVID in 24, they went to quarterly bids or semi-annual bids. Then when the tightness started hitting at the end of the year last year and early in the year, people were saying, let's go back to the 12-month. And now a lot of people are coming back saying, we're going back to the 3-month because we just don't know what the hell's going to happen. So do you see this tightness? How do you think the back half of the year on demand looks? Do you think it changes? Do you think it stays the same?
So yeah, let me talk through those three components, right? Demand, I think like the amount of demand is going to sort of slowly increase, right? Not rapidly increase, but slowly increase as we go through the balance of this year. We just sort of are in sort of a natural trajectory right now with demand increasing, but not in a real accelerating way. So that's not the thing putting pressure on the market right now. In the back half of the year, though, what happens to capacity is the real question. Okay? In a normal market, a normal cycle, here in the next 3 to 6 months, we'd start seeing hiring really accelerate. We'd see new entrants coming into the market, and we'd see that driver population start to go back up, right? Because we've been spending the last 3 years kind of pulling it down, all right? The change this time, though, is the regulatory framework, right? The enforcement mechanisms. If those are truly limiting the ability to get that next driver back into the driver's seat, all right, that's going to be a critical problem. And that means we stay sitting at 99% utilization for an extended period of time till we get well into, 2027. And that would be a very difficult market to manage through. Now, we still have an expectation. You're going to find drivers and get them put in the system, But is it going to be at a normal rate or a vastly reduced rate? And we just don't know yet. We'll probably start finding that out in about 3 or 4 months. And we'll see if fleets are able to start adding driver in or not. But that's still going to be a bit of a lagging indicator. It's not really going to tell us how well we're adding capacity in later this year.
What do you think we're seeing more? Like, is there going to be more pressure on larger fleets? So the fewer of the fleets are large, but they account for about 60-70% of the driver population. Do you see smaller fleets reacting different than large fleets?
They're both going to be pressured, but they're going to have different pressures. So the very, very small fleet, right? That 1 and 2 unit operation, right? The Montgomery ruling. So that now, brokers and 3PLs are going to be, they were already focused on safety and all that when they were vetting carriers. They're just going to be even more focused on safety and vetting when they're bringing carriers in, right? So that's going to be hard for those very small carriers. They just don't have enough inspection data, enough time in the system for them to be properly vetted, all right? So they're going to have some difficulty as the Montgomery ruling comes into sort of full effect. The larger carriers are going to be struggling to ramp up their hiring activity because they spent 3 years not worrying about doing that. All right. And now we've got the play of, all right, can we find new drivers and bring them in? Or are we simply taking those 1 and 2 operation drivers, pulling them out of that spot market, bringing them to a carrier? All right. So we're shifting them, but we're not adding capacity back into the system. All right. Now, they're going to be probably more productive in some sense if they move to the carrier, but they also might not be making as much money, right? And so for them, it's a bit of a trade-off. Can I find enough loads post-Montgomery that I can continue to operate? Or does it just become so difficult, I can move to the carrier? But again, that's a shift in capacity. It's not new capacity coming in the market. So are they able to do that? Or are the bigger carriers able to recruit new drivers into the system? And that brings capacity back in. With rates this high, if they still stay elevated for at least some period of time, 3, 6, 9 months, that seems like it should be elevated enough and long enough that they're able to. But again, it's a different enforcement environment than we've ever had to deal with before. This isn't like a regulatory change. You have the ELD mandate at the end of 2017, right? That just made everybody a little bit less productive all at once. This is a different one. This is the actual driver capacity, and can they legally get back into that truck or not?
Yeah. What do you think will happen with? I think more for me the bigger. I think Montgomery, like most, we already were doing safety, and like you said,
Absolutely,
earlier, everybody were already looking at safety. But it is, to your point. I did a look at Indiana's fleets. And I looked at their MCS 150 registration, and if they put that they hauled dry versus refrigerated. If you took none rated, 96% of them are none rated. A large portion of them have 0 safety inspections. 1.3% of all Indiana registrants are conditional. So there's 70,000 power units registered to about 10,000 trucking companies, 9,000 trucking companies that do dry refrigerated. You're down to like 60% would be none rated, no inspections, conditional, or have basics over the threshold. And the driver population would go down by like 40%. It's interesting to see like how will this play out later, but do you think like Delilah's Law or Modus will have a big impact on supply?
I think the Delilah's Law would have more potential, right? It's not passed. It's just proposed. It probably has a better chance if you sort of get into a lame duck session late this year. And so then there's a potential for it to continue to increase the enforcement environment that we've already been moving towards over the last year. All right. So I
Right.
think it's a further continuation of that. I don't think it's like a step shift function change in what happens, but I just think it continues to incrementally increase the enforcement mechanism going forward. And so I think that there's going to be continued pressure on the enforcement side, no matter what. All right. And so that's going to be an ongoing pressure point.
Yeah. I feel like too, like at the state level, will the state level try to do their own thing?
And we've seen that, right? You know,
Right.
you bring up Indiana, they passed some of their own laws on the non-domicile CDL issue, right? It didn't necessarily impact a significant. I think it was maybe like 2,000 licenses that got impacted, something
Yeah.
like that. But I mean, it's another one. As states do these types of incremental elements, it's just further ratcheting up of those enforcement pressures throughout the industry.
Because the one thought I had too on that was if that happens, that's largely going to affect small fleets. But then when you look at the supply side, 2020, 2019 versus 2022, that large increase, have you ever seen an increase in registrations in your career?
No, we've never, I mean, we've got data going all the way back in, early 90s, and there's never been any type of increase like we had coming out of 2020 with just the absolute number of new small operations coming into play. Now, it's certainly come down over the last 3 years, but it is still, highly, highly elevated. And unless there is some very dramatic changes in not just modus, but the overall enforcement on how they're doing those grants and those authorities, I don't see it necessarily shifting all the way back to where we were, pre-2020.
Right. So, but that did the overall, like, if you take, I think it went from, I'm just doing round numbers. I think it went from like 400,000 motor carriers, 300 some thousand to like 600 some thousand registered motor carriers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like it was that kind of a jump. But did the overall truck driver employment change? Or were these foreign-based drivers coming in? Were they drivers coming from larger fleets that decided to break off because money was so high? Where did these people come from? And what did the driver workforce really change that significantly?
We don't have good data on who exactly it was.
Okay.
All right, so where those drivers came from. But it did effectively increase the overall level of drivers in the system. All right. Now, there was some times in which it wasn't as dramatic as just looking at those registration numbers would say it was. But if you look at 2022, all right, early 2022, rates were coming down, fuel prices jumped, right? And at the same time, fleets had just ramped up their hiring apparatus, all right? And so a large contingency of those small operations converted from an owner-operator to a fleet driver. And they did it within the span of like 3 to 6 months, right? It was a rapid increase in the employment base, right? Which is just only part of the reflection of the overall driver environment, because those small owner-operators aren't part of employment data. So we see these shifts that happen, right? But if we just look at what happened in late 2020, early 2021, part of it was people shifting from a fleet to an owner operator. Part of it was bringing new capacity into the market. So we did see an overall increase in the absolute level of capacity that was in the marketplace. And it hit a peak basically there in late 2021, early 2022. And then the market began to correct itself. And, that's where we were on that 3-4 year cycle of trying to whittle that capacity down. And it just happened. It just happened over a very prolonged period.
Why do you think that is? I have some theories on it, but I've never seen, usually a market cycle flips much faster. So we'll see the shift go. it's a trucking company, broker market, and then it goes shipper market, back and forth. This one, it was a sustained, I don't really think it was a downside, but it was a sustained market shift that, because I don't believe any of the rates from COVID were real anyway, but this one felt like it was slow. Why do you think that was?
Part of it is because we didn't have a downturn in demand in the same way we usually do. We saw a quick downturn in rates, right? Rates came down very rapidly in 2022, but that wasn't really due to overall demand in the system. It came down some, it moderated, but it wasn't a real down cycle in the amount of volumes in the overall system that were there over the course of the last few years. Because it wasn't demand generated, that made it different, right? So we had this excess capacity, and usually it comes away very quickly because demand goes away very quickly. But the demand didn't necessarily go away. It was kind of in a steady state for an extended period of time, but the rates came down obviously very, very rapidly.
Very quickly. Yeah.
But that meant that there was enough demand in the system, even with low rates, that they could find lows, they could continue to move stuff. They had saved up enough cash, going through 2020, 2021, that they had a couple of years of time where they could operate that. And so that's why, part of why I think it took such an extended period of time is because we never had the typical correction that we would normally see in demand. So therefore the capacity was able to kind of hang around a lot longer than you typically see in a trucking cycle.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because, like you said, fuel was up, and if you're an owner operator, that's a tough expense. At the same time, the spot market volumes they weren't the same, and revenue per load, like our revenue per load, went down significantly as the rates corrected itself in 22 and 23, and so it just is, to me, it's, how did they stay that long? And maybe it was their ORs were so good in 22 and 21 that they had enough cash, but it's such a weird slowdown.
Agreed. And there's no conclusive evidence that you can point to and say, this is what happened. It's all more anecdotal and kind of side conjecture because, like I said, there's just no evidence there that you can kind of point to and say, this is what drove the market. There's just a number of things that were all kind of happening at the same time that I think were a confluence of events that just kept the capacity in the market a lot longer than we normally would see.
Do you think large fleets, in your opinion, would look at the market today as it shifts and they could capture better contract pricing? Do you think in a typical market, when they see good, they add tractors? Do you think they're going to be slower to add tractors?
That's our thesis. We think they'll be a little bit slower on adding capacity in than they typically have been in the previous few cycles. There's a couple of rationales for that. One, like we said, they just haven't put the apparatus in place to really focus on hiring and recruiting. All right, so that takes time to develop. Two, there's been a lot of cost increases over these last few years. And so they need to see sustained increases in pricing and margin in order to be able to, overcome those cost increases. Because especially if you're looking at trying to add equipment, just adding in a new trailer can cost you, 20, 30% more than it would have 5 years ago. And, the cost for new equipment's going to go up by $10,000, $15,000 as we go into 2027 and have some new emission mandates come into effect. And so there's going to be some continued pressures on the cost side that are going to limit them in the near term on wanting to add a lot of capacity in.
When I think of the Motor Carrier Act and the FAA Act and the things that trucking had done to keep the barrier to entry low, so minimal cost up front, you did not used to take a lot. You filled out an MCS 150 and other forms, about $500-$600 and 750,000 in BIPD insurance. And you go out and you can get a cargo policy and maybe workers' comp. What areas do you think cost wise will start to, if they come out and they say we need to change insurance to a minimum of 5 million, and where do you think carriers will face outside of fuel the most cost pressure?
I mean, first and foremost, they're going to have wage pressure. And so as they get their margins back up and have some elevated rates for a period of time, they're going to get some pushback pretty soon, I think, on what their wage environment is going to be for their drivers. And so there's a lot that they don't have much control over. Fuel, they have put in fuel surcharges over the last 20 years. They're pretty well set in place. And so it's not a major constraint for them anymore, and they can do some hedging as well. But they're not going to be able to dictate where fuel is going to go. They're already very cost-efficient operations. It's not like trucking fleets have lots of excess overhead and whatnot built into the systems. They're continuing to build out, more tech infrastructure and utilizing those resources. So they'll be able to kind of continue to whittle away overhead arena. But they're already so lean that it's not like they can drastically change their cost structure, right? You can't drastically change the cost structure of a carrier until you get rid of the driver. That's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you think about, but I always like to go back and look at different reports on what cost is, and to see the cost structure from 18, 19 into today, and to see what's impacting it the most. To your point, like you can't really whittle it down. I mean, the rate per mile is what the rate per mile is.
Exactly. They've got insurance costs, they've got maintenance costs, they've got some overhead, and then they've got the driver and the fuel, and that's really about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because inefficiency to me is I don't know what % of the time a tractor and trailer is inefficient, but my guess is it's higher than what people would suspect. And there's a multitude of issues, from parking to dock inefficiency, slow loading, slow unloading. It just seems like to me that really also is another factor, that if there's things we could do to help the truck driver be more profitable, efficiency is an area of opportunity.
Back in March, we were dealing with the big increases in fuel, and I did a little bit of a thought experiment on what happens when you change your speed at different speed levels, and how much does it impact their cost, right? Which is essentially a bottom line item relative to their time, all right? And if you reduced your speed at the very highest speeds, right? So you go from 75 to 70, all right? You gain a good cost advantage. You don't lose a whole lot of time. But what you don't want to do is slow down from 55 to 50. You don't gain a whole lot from your fuel mileage, and you start losing a bunch of time. But here's the thing that was maybe not counterintuitive, but I didn't anticipate. The thing that had the most benefit is if you can just speed up that first and final mile environment. When you're running less than 30 miles an hour, if you get gains there, reduce congestion, reduce stop and go traffic, all of that, you gain both time and fuel mileage at the same time. And so anything that can be done to improve that first and final mile is a direct benefit to a driver's productivity. It's also a direct benefit to the bottom line, because you're able to save pretty significantly on what your fuel environment is.
I've never seen an environment now where on-time pickup has had such a focus. And it's largely due to capacity not making it in or capacity making it in late. And so a lot of times people are staging, it's backing up docks and really impacting slow loading. And that's an area where it's, man, if we can get these trucks out, get them moving, it helps everybody. Delivery helps, delivery fines go down, less labor on the dock.
Is that mostly affecting live load and unload, or drop and hook as well?
It's less on the drop and hook side, but you would typically think like, hey, it's a drop load, but some of these shippers, they're constrained by how many doors they're going to give to the drop, and if the live gets all messed up, then all of a sudden now they're having to stage in other areas, and drop trailers are sitting loaded longer than they should have, or not getting loaded when you said you sent a driver in to do a swap, and there's nothing on the trailer. And so it's impacting overall, like OT, a lot of these OTIF has changed a lot over the past couple of years, but a lot of different shippers or companies, they have some form of fines, chargebacks, and we're seeing more like late loading fees. So if the carrier arrives, they'll say, well, you're late, $150. That again, that's seems like a small amount, but it's not. And it's crazy to see that happening. But
what, from your perspective, what's maybe not the solution, but what's the way to kind of think through and evaluate and deal with that?
So there's a mixture of drop, mixture one of consistency, carrier consistency, broker consistency. There's been so much rate change, rate shop, rate adjust, rate, that there's been a lot of turnover on carrier turnover, broker turnover that leads to instability, number one. So they're not aware of the shipper. Two, a lot of them, when they were going out and doing variable tendering, they're rate shopping every single load. And if the spot market comes in lower, they won't tender the contract, they'll tender the spot market. And a lot of times carriers, if they're getting a lot of money or a little bit of money, a lot of times when they get a locked, they're overshooting their hours because they're constrained by their hours of service. But if they're getting a lot of money, they're gonna say yes, but they really can't do it. So that's one is again back to carrier stability. Two, I think leveraging the drop, but there's also ways of segmenting doors. I think we could do better at segmenting doors. Not all. You could have a recovery door. And then looking at your SKU flow, I think if certain SKUs move more consistently, can you stabilize those and move those more regular patterns to get those things out better? And then also, a lot of times, a lot of these shippers now are scheduling inefficient load times. So if it's a 7 a.m. pickup, but it's a 6 p.m. delivery the next night, and it's 500 miles, you really hurt the truck. And so a lot of people say, yes, I'll pick it up at 7, but they really come in later knowing that they have 500 miles to get over to an 1800. So I think better scheduling and sticking tighter to transit times is another factor.
Now, one thing we've seen from specifically the large fleets over the course of, it started about a decade ago, was they significantly increased their trailer pool relative to their tractors, right? So obviously trying to utilize more drop and hook environment. Is that bleeding through to the smaller environment in the same way? We've seen some increases in things like power only options, meaning that there's trailer pools in effect or shipper trailers being utilized. Has that changed over the last couple of years?
No, I think and we do that for people. We'll bring in trailer pools and then we do power onlys and move it out. I think the lanes and the corridors that you do it on it matters. So for instance, if you can have a strategy where I take the lanes that have remote deliveries and maybe move those live or move the more dense stuff that takes more time, get those in. But a lot of what we are seeing though, on counter to that is if you had a 2-to-1 ratio or 3-to-1 ratio, those trailers are getting and sitting as storage. more important than they are to actually delivering it. So a lot of times we'll see these trailers they're loaded, but we're loading them 3 days early, or they get to the delivery and they were sitting for 72 hours or longer until they really need the product. So it's driving inefficiency, and you've got costs of your trailers being tied up. So I may put more trailers out, but really now they're ended up being storage trailers.
Which basically gets you back to your same point of how do we schedule more appropriately, and try to reduce. It's a version of waste in the system, right?
Yeah, and some of it's a mix too. These machines we really want to focus on uptime, right? And so the machine's up and producing, and then when do we count it as a sale? When it's off the dock and in a trailer, we've printed the bill of lading. There's all different factors affecting people's interest, and transport has different interest in the guy that's selling the product. So what do you think is the consumer and the economy looks like for the next 6 to 12 months? And it's a question I get a lot. Should we do bids now? Will this stay the same? Or is the economy going to slow down and we'll be okay?
So if I think about the consumer, right, that big broad arena of what all of us are, things seem pretty stable. I don't see anything being a huge detriment to what the consumer is going to be able to do over the next 6 to 12 months. I don't see a whole lot of like really strong tailwinds either, right? The one big caveat that's kind of been in place now for the last few months is just what does fuel and energy mean? And, if things are going to escalate and be on and off again for a period of time would be my assumption. And so that means elevated pricing of some sort, probably not $120 oil, but $75, $80, $85 oil could be fairly normal for a period of time. That reduces the power of the consumer. But again, I think it's more of a light headwind at this stage, and there's just not a whole lot of good tailwinds to kind of offset it.
Do you see manufacturing staying consistent?
We're seeing a broad-based level of slow growth. If we look at sort of the manufacturing and industrial society from a big picture. So we're not seeing it accelerating. We're not seeing it being extremely robust, but we're seeing it being at least somewhat broad-based and some fairly stable growth finally getting into the mix. The area that obviously isn't is, AI and data centers and all of that. That's a highly concentrated industry, a high value industry, and it's driving a lot of demand in, very particular verticals, but it's not enough of a broad-based environment that can really bleed out to sort of the broader industrials and help lift everybody else's as well. Because typically, if you look at manufacturing activity, it drives other activity and helps bring everybody along together. The AI build out doesn't really do that. It's highly specific to a vertical. It's very high value goods. They're throwing a lot of money at it. Eventually that money's going to run out or slow significantly. But for now, it's still helping drive a very specific fundamental within the transportation marketplace, especially for flatbed.
Yeah, the flatbed, I looked one day, it was like 300 and some loads to one truck, and ungodly change in the flatbed sector that honestly I've never seen.
And it's got some room to run, all right? It could easily go for another, 6, 9 months, or maybe even another year. Eventually, though, it has to lose growth, and it slows down pretty significantly. And there's potential then for it to turn into a bubble, but hopefully it's just the end of a boom.
Right. But I love all the work that you guys do. I know we've had you out to an event, and we think you do a great job and present good information, and appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity today, and I like hearing from people are actually out there in the field and what they see going on. We can get into an ivory tower and, analyze what we see happening with data, but there's got to be a point where the rubber hits the road and things actually have to get moved, and understanding how those are actually operating is a critical component of knowing what's going on in the marketplace.
And that's a wrap for More Than a Broker. You heard firsthand accounts from industry experts and Spot's hardworking individuals, revealing a culture of collaboration and innovation. For more information about Spot, our service offerings, our people and culture, our job postings, and more, check us out online at spotinc.com. That is spotinc.com. Thank you for listening and for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep striving to be more than a broker.